Good morning. My name is Daniel Sweetser, and I'm reading through a novel I just finished up, Hope to Start Small. I'm going to be reading Chapter 3, Section 4, Plans. Frank and Constance had moved their family to the barn for a number of reasons, but the reason that had driven them most was the prospect of growing food. The lot was not especially large, a little over an acre, but it was the largest plot of land they had ever owned, and they were eager to put it to use. The lot was divided roughly in half, with the house at the front, a play area behind, and then the large cleared field. And so there was little debate about where the garden and the blueberry field would go. It was just a matter of doing the thing. The first decision they had to make was how much of the field to dedicate to the family garden, and how much to dedicate to the blueberries. Constance was a very practical woman, and while she appreciated her husband's desire to plant his field, she knew they would need to have more in the garden than just blueberries. Frank, for his part, was not stingy, and so he was willing to allocate as much of the field as Constance needed. Frank started by staking out the whole area of the field. He wanted to be a few feet from the lot line on all sides so that he wouldn't need to rip anything up later. In the back of the yard, there was a dilapidated shed and a line of beautiful tall pine trees. He set the field in front of those pines, thankful that the sun came from the other direction, and so was available to both the field and the trees without any competition. Then Frank calculated the estimated square footage per person that the family would need in the garden to generate enough food to feed them. He made rough estimates based on that, pacing the field, looking rather odd to anyone observing. And when he had settled on how much space they would need, it turned out that the front trapezoidal section of the field would be just right for the family garden. And much to his delight, what was left over behind it was a rather perfectly square 75 feet by 75 feet for the blueberry field. After this, there was much to sort out. They would need to work through whether to use raised beds, if they could afford them, and if so, what kind. There was an incredibly drawn-out deliberation over what kind of fencing to use for the field, whether and how to weed, what to plant in other areas of the house, and so on. But for the first time, Frank and Constance had a rough outline of a hope being fulfilled. The blueberries would have a home in lovely rows, and the family would have a garden to tend, to fill with all sorts of delicious food. Constance had also hoped that in the move the family would have an opportunity to raise animals. Her heart had been set on goats for some time, although she wasn't opposed to chickens. When Frank and Constance had been considering the barn early on, they had evaluated ordinances in the town. Frank had also reached out to the town building department, and between the written law and the email response they received, it became clear that unless they had another 4 acres, they wouldn't be permitted to have farm animals. When Constance had first heard this news, it had taken the barn out of contention. But over time her heart had changed so that she was willing to let go of that part of her dream, at least for a while. It was a quiet sacrifice she made that allowed the family to move joyfully to the barn. But for her own sake, she kept in reserve the hope that she might be able to make an appeal to the town later to grant an exception. It was still late winter when the family had moved to the barn, and there was little planting to be done yet. For now, Frank and Constance could only dream and talk and plan and wait for the mornings to cease covering the field in frost. But after having done so much to get there, it was hard to sit and do nothing but this. Frank, of course, continued to tend the plants in the greenhouse, and they continued to grow, albeit slowly. But Frank felt like doing something more tangible. And so at some point early on, and rather prematurely, Frank went out and staked the rows for the blueberry field. For some reason it felt right to him to at least begin to imagine the lay of the land. He set the rows back from what would ultimately be a fence boundary, and then measured 6 feet at a time between rows. And as he measured and staked in the cold, he began to picture the field as it would be. He was like an artist sketching the rough outline of a portrait, knowing that many of the first lines drawn would ultimately be erased in deference to the real thing. But it was good for Frank's heart to put his hands to work. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.